None of this requires malice. It requires alignment. Corporations need KPIs. Governments need compliance thresholds. NGOs need success indicators. Farmers need access to markets and premiums. Everyone agrees on one thing. Complexity is bad for adoption. So sustainability is simplified until it fits into spreadsheets. The result is a system that rewards the appearance of responsibility rather than the achievement of resilience. Greenwashing, in this context, is not lying. It is selective truth-telling, highlighting what improved while structurally ignoring what worsened, publishing gains without publishing dependencies. And because the system is formalized, this selectivity becomes normalized. Take certification programs. Many are built with good intentions. Reduce harm, encourage better practices, create accountability, but certification demands consistency, and consistency often conflicts with ecological adaptation. A field that needs occasional disturbance to reset biological balance may be penalized for it. A farmer responding to an unexpected pest pressure may lose compliance by acting pragmatically. Flexibility becomes risk, so farmers learn to manage for the audit, not for the ecosystem. This is one of the least discussed costs of sustainability frameworks: behavioral distortion. When incentives are tied to specific practices instead of outcomes, decision-making shifts. The goal becomes staying inside the acceptable box, not responding optimally to real conditions. Over time, this creates homogeneity. Systems begin to look similar. Management converges. Diversity of approaches shrinks, and diversity is not an aesthetic preference. It is a resilience mechanism. Uniform systems fail uniformly, yet sustainability branding thrives on uniformity. It needs recognizable signals, cover crops that photograph well, reduced tillage that looks calm from above, input substitutions that can be listed as natural or biological, regardless of sourcing. The deeper questions are harder to market. Are nutrient cycles actually closing, or just shifting upstream? Is labor intensity increasing without economic support? Are farmers carrying more risk while downstream actors capture the reputational value? These questions destabilize the story, so they are rarely asked publicly. Greenwashing becomes structural when entire value chains benefit from not asking them. Consumers get moral reassurance, corporations get ESG scores, policymakers get progress reports, and farmers get another layer of expectations without proportional leverage. The system looks sustainable, the pressure flows downward. What makes this especially effective is that the language of sustainability absorbs criticism. When a system fails, it is described as not implemented correctly. When outcomes disappoint, the solution is more sustainability, never reassessment. This creates a feedback loop where the concept cannot fail. Only people can, and when a concept cannot fail, it cannot improve. The hidden cost here is epistemic. The loss of learning. When metrics are fixed and narratives protected, evidence that contradicts them becomes inconvenient. It is explained away instead of integrated. Over time, sustainability stops being a hypothesis and becomes a belief. Belief systems do not adapt well to environmental variability. They also do not protect farmers when market conditions change. Premiums disappear, certification costs remain, input prices fluctuate, the image no longer pays the bills. At that point, the greenwashed system reveals its true nature. It was never designed to absorb shocks. It was designed to signal virtue under stable conditions. And agriculture is never stable for long. This is why greenwashing in farming is more dangerous than in most industries. Crops cannot pivot quarterly. Soil cannot rebrand. Biological debt accumulates silently. When the narrative collapses, recovery is slow and expensive. The tragedy is that many of the practices promoted under sustainability banners are not inherently flawed. Some are valuable, some are necessary, but when they are embedded in rigid frameworks optimized for optics, they lose their adaptive power. They become rules instead of tools. And tools misused at scale do damage quietly. By the time the cost becomes visible, the system has already moved on to the next label. Regenerative, climate smart, nature positive, new words, same pressure. The field still looks beautiful, and the bill is still unpaid. Soil is the favorite prop of sustainable farming narratives, precisely because it is the hardest thing for outsiders to read. Dark soil photographs well, residue on the surface signals care. Undisturbed ground suggests respect. To the untrained eye, soil either looks healthy or damaged, alive or dead. The reality is less cinematic and far more uncomfortable. Soil health is not a snapshot. It is a trajectory. Many systems marketed as sustainable focus heavily on surface indicators. Reduced tillage, permanent cover, minimal disturbance. These practices are presented as universally beneficial, and in many contexts, they are. But when they become doctrine instead of strategy, soil begins to accumulate invisible stress. Compaction is the first quiet cost. Without periodic mechanical disruption, pressure concentrates below the active root zone. Machinery still passes, loads still increase, rainfall patterns still fluctuate. Over time, dense layers form beneath the surface, restricting root penetration and water movement. From above, everything looks fine. Crops emerge evenly, residue protects the soil, there is no dust, no erosion, no visual alarm. Below, roots flatten and turn sideways. When roots cannot explore depth, systems compensate. More precise fertilization, more frequent applications, foliar feeding, microbial inoculants designed to unlock nutrients that roots can no longer reach physically. This is not soil regeneration. It is chemical scaffolding. The soil becomes dependent on management intensity to maintain yields. Remove the inputs, and performance collapses. The system has not become resilient. It has become delicately balanced. This dependency is rarely discussed in sustainability marketing because it complicates the story. Inputs labeled as biological or natural are still inputs. They are still manufactured, transported, priced, and subject to supply chain volatility. Replacing synthetic nitrogen with biologically derived products does not eliminate dependency. It shifts it. Another hidden cost is stratification. In reduced disturbance systems, nutrients accumulate near the surface. Biology concentrates where residues remain. Deeper layers become biologically quiet. This creates a shallow system optimized for stability under ideal moisture conditions. When drought hits, shallow systems suffer first. Water infiltration slows due to compaction layers. Roots cannot chase moisture downward. Stress increases. Yield variability spikes. The system that looked stable becomes fragile under exactly the conditions sustainability claims to address. Again, this is not an argument against reduced tillage. It is an argument against absolutism. Healthy soil systems are dynamic. They require context-specific disturbance, diversity, and rest. When practices are frozen to satisfy certification or narrative consistency, soil loses its adaptive rhythm. And soil remembers. Biological simplification is another cost that hides well. Cover crops are promoted as a solution to biodiversity loss. But in practice, many systems rely on narrow species mixes chosen for ease of management and predictable outcomes. Diversity becomes symbolic rather than functional. A field with 2 or 3 cover species photographs as diverse. Ecologically, it may not be. True biological resilience comes from complexity that resists standardization. That complexity is hard to manage, hard to explain, and hard to certify. So it is often avoided. The result is a soil food web that functions, but only within a narrow band of conditions. Outside that band, intervention increases. Sustainability narratives rarely include this trade-off. They highlight reduced erosion and improved organic matter while omitting increased management sensitivity. Organic matter itself becomes a misleading metric. Rising organic matter percentages are celebrated without examining composition, depth distribution, or turnover rate. Carbon near the surface is counted the same as carbon stabilized deep in the profile, even though their resilience is vastly different. This incentivizes shallow gains over durable ones. Farmers are praised for progress that may not persist. Systems are labeled sustainable based on trends that reverse quickly under stress. And when reversal happens, the blame falls on weather, not design. The hidden soil cost is not collapse. It is maintenance. Systems optimized for appearance require constant attention to remain functional. They do not self-correct easily. They demand precision, timing, and increasingly specialized inputs. This raises the barrier to entry. It concentrates knowledge. It increases risk. The farmer becomes a system operator, not a land steward. Deviations become dangerous. Improvisation becomes expensive. Soil, once buffered by complexity and redundancy, becomes sensitive to error. That sensitivity does not show up in sustainability reports. It shows up in sleepless nights during dry spells. In yield maps that look fine until they suddenly don't. In financial spreadsheets where input lines grow while margins stay flat. The soil still looks healthy in the brochure. In reality, it is being held together by expertise and inputs that few systems acknowledge. And when sustainability depends on constant correction, the question is no longer whether the soil is improving. The question is who is paying to keep it from failing. Carbon became the hero of sustainable farming for one simple reason: it can be counted. Not accurately, not completely, but convincingly enough to fit into reports, markets, and policy targets. In theory, focusing on carbon makes sense. Soil carbon is tied to structure, water retention, biological activity, and long-term productivity. Increasing it should signal improvement. In practice, carbon accounting in agriculture often measures movement, not stability. And movement is easy to fake without intending to. Most carbon gains promoted under sustainable frameworks occur near the soil surface. Residue retention, reduced disturbance, increased root mass in the top layers. These changes show up quickly in tests. They look impressive on graphs. They generate credits, but surface carbon is volatile. It is the first to oxidize under drought, heat, or management change. It is vulnerable to a single bad season. It disappears quietly, without press releases. Deep, mineral-associated carbon is far more stable. It takes longer to build. It requires roots to reach depth, microbial pathways to function over time, and physical processes that cannot be rushed. It is also far harder to measure. So most systems do not prioritize it. Carbon markets reward what is detectable within short verification windows. 5 years, sometimes less. Permanence is assumed, not proven. Risk is externalized. This creates a predictable distortion. Practices are selected for their ability to generate measurable gains quickly, not for their capacity to store carbon durably. Systems optimize for audit cycles instead of ecological timelines. Carbon becomes a performance metric, not a functional outcome. The language around sequestration reinforces this illusion. Carbon is described as stored, as if it were placed in a vault. In reality, soil carbon is part of a living cycle. It moves constantly between pools. Stabilization is conditional, not guaranteed. Yet credits are sold as if permanence were already achieved. This is where sustainable farming begins to intersect uncomfortably with financial abstraction. Carbon credits transform a biological process into a tradable asset. Once traded, the incentive shifts. The goal becomes maintaining eligibility, not maximizing ecosystem resilience. If a farmer loses carbon due to drought, is that failure? Ecologically, no. It is a response to stress. Financially, yes. It undermines the asset. So systems are pushed toward stability at the expense of adaptability. Risk is smoothed in spreadsheets, not in fields. Another hidden cost emerges here: opportunity locking. Once a field is enrolled in carbon programs, management flexibility shrinks. Practices that might improve long-term resilience but reduce short-term carbon metrics become risky. Occasional tillage to address compaction. Crop rotations that disrupt residue patterns. Adaptive responses to pest outbreaks. Carbon became the hero of sustainable farming for one simple reason: it can be counted. Not accurately, not completely, but convincingly enough to fit into reports, markets, and policy targets. In theory, focusing on carbon makes sense. Soil carbon is tied to structure, water retention, biological activity, and long-term productivity. Increasing it should signal improvement. In practice, carbon accounting in agriculture often measures movement, not stability. And movement is easy to fake without intending to. Most carbon gains promoted under sustainable frameworks occur near the soil surface. Residue retention, reduced disturbance, increased root mass in the top layers. These changes show up quickly in tests. They look impressive on graphs. They generate credits, but surface carbon is volatile. It is the first to oxidize under drought, heat, or management change. It is vulnerable to a single bad season. It disappears quietly, without press releases. Deep, mineral-associated carbon is far more stable. It takes longer to build. It requires roots to reach depth, microbial pathways to function over time, and physical processes that cannot be rushed. It is also far harder to measure. So most systems do not prioritize it. Carbon markets reward what is detectable within short verification windows. 5 years, sometimes less. Permanence is assumed, not proven. Risk is externalized. This creates a predictable distortion. Practices are selected for their ability to generate measurable gains quickly, not for their capacity to store carbon durably. Systems optimize for audit cycles instead of ecological timelines. Carbon becomes a performance metric, not a functional outcome. The language around sequestration reinforces this illusion. Carbon is described as stored, as if it were placed in a vault. In reality, soil carbon is part of a living cycle. It moves constantly between pools. Stabilization is conditional, not guaranteed. Yet credits are sold as if permanence were already achieved. This is where sustainable farming begins to intersect uncomfortably with financial abstraction. Carbon credits transform a biological process into a tradable asset. Once traded, the incentive shifts. The goal becomes maintaining eligibility, not maximizing ecosystem resilience. If a farmer loses carbon due to drought, is that failure? Ecologically, no. It is a response to stress. Financially, yes. It undermines the asset, so systems are pushed toward stability at the expense of adaptability. Risk is smoothed in spreadsheets, not in fields. Another hidden cost emerges here: opportunity locking. Once a field is enrolled in carbon programs, management flexibility shrinks. Practices that might improve long-term resilience but reduce short-term carbon metrics become risky. Occasional tillage to address compaction. Crop rotations that disrupt residue patterns. Adaptive responses to pest outbreaks. The farmer hesitates, not because the land does not need change, but because the accounting penalizes it. Carbon-focused sustainability often assumes linear progress. More carbon every year, steady improvement. Nature does not work that way. Real systems fluctuate. They lose ground to gain stability later. They trade one function for another depending on conditions. Forcing linearity onto nonlinear systems creates stress. This stress does not appear in sustainability dashboards. It appears in management anxiety. There is also a boundary problem rarely acknowledged. Carbon accounting often isolates the field while ignoring upstream and downstream effects. Inputs used to support carbon gains are treated as neutral or beneficial if labeled biological. Their production emissions are discounted. Their transport is averaged. Their manufacturing footprint fades into assumptions. The field becomes a carbon sink on paper while the supply chain remains opaque. This is not carbon neutrality. It is boundary manipulation. When sustainability frameworks reward isolated metrics, systems reorganize around them. Carbon becomes the language of legitimacy. Other dimensions fall silent. Water use efficiency becomes secondary. Nutrient leakage becomes contextual. Labor intensity becomes invisible. Financial risk concentration becomes someone else's problem. Carbon speaks. The rest whispers. And because carbon metrics carry moral weight, questioning them feels antagonistic. Criticism is framed as anti-climate. Skepticism is framed as denial. This shuts down necessary nuance. The tragedy is that soil carbon is genuinely important. Managed well, it contributes to resilience. Managed poorly, it becomes a false signal. When accounting replaces ecology, sustainability turns into a compliance exercise. Fields are managed to satisfy models rather than respond to reality. Carbon rises, systems tighten, and when an extreme event hits, the model does not absorb the shock. The soil does. The hidden cost of carbon-centric sustainability is not that it fails immediately. It is that it teaches systems to value what is countable over what is durable. Numbers go up, options go down, the field still looks perfect, and the carbon, counted once, is assumed to stay forever. The language of sustainable farming suggests shared responsibility. Everyone benefits, everyone contributes, the land improves, the climate stabilizes, and the farmer is rewarded for doing the right thing. In practice, the cost structure tells a different story. Most sustainability programs are designed upstream, validated downstream, and implemented in the middle. The middle is the farmer. That is where complexity concentrates. Adopting sustainable practices often increases management intensity. More monitoring, more timing sensitivity, more documentation, more specialized inputs. The system may reduce certain costs, but it introduces new ones that are less predictable. Precision replaces brute force. That sounds efficient until precision fails. Margins in agriculture are already thin. When sustainability frameworks assume farmers can absorb additional risk in exchange for potential premiums, they underestimate volatility. Premiums fluctuate, input prices rise, certification costs remain fixed, the farmer carries the variance. Financial support rarely matches responsibility. Incentives are often temporary. Compliance is permanent. Once systems are restructured, reverting is expensive. Equipment changes, learning curves steepen, knowledge becomes path-dependent. If markets shift, flexibility is limited. Meanwhile, much of the value created by sustainability branding is captured elsewhere. Processors, retailers, and brands monetize the story. ESG reports improve. Access to capital expands. Public image strengthens. The farmer supplies the credibility. This asymmetry is rarely addressed. Sustainability narratives focus on environmental metrics while treating economic resilience as assumed. But without economic resilience, environmental gains do not persist. A stressed farmer cannot manage a complex system indefinitely. There is also a risk concentration effect. Sustainable systems often rely on narrower operational windows. Timing matters more, errors cost more, weather variability hits harder. Under stable conditions, performance looks strong. Under stress, losses amplify. This creates a quiet selection pressure. Farmers with capital, technical support, and risk tolerance succeed. Others exit. Consolidation accelerates. Sustainability improves averages while hollowing out diversity. The hidden cost is not just higher expenses. It is reduced optionality. When systems are optimized for certification, they lose adaptability. When adaptability disappears, resilience becomes theoretical. True sustainability would distribute risk across the value chain. Current systems often concentrate it at the production level. The field looks calm, the balance sheet does not. Biodiversity is one of the most repeated words in sustainable agriculture, and one of the least delivered outcomes. Fields are presented as more diverse because something extra was added. A cover crop mix, a flowering strip, a rotation adjustment. These elements matter, but they are often deployed as signals rather than systems. Diversity becomes visual and seasonal, not structural. True biodiversity is disruptive. It introduces unpredictability. It complicates management. It resists standardization. That makes it difficult to integrate into sustainability frameworks built around consistency and auditability. So diversity is curated. A small number of species are selected because they are easy to control, compatible with existing equipment, and unlikely to interfere with yields. The result is repetition under the appearance of variety. Monoculture does not disappear. It learns to wear accessories. This is not ecological restoration. It is aesthetic diversification. In real ecosystems, diversity creates redundancy. When one pathway fails, another compensates. In curated systems, redundancy is limited. When conditions fall outside the narrow design window, intervention increases. The system functions, but only with active correction. Biodiversity is also unevenly distributed. Non-productive areas are enhanced while productive zones remain optimized for uniformity. This separation simplifies accounting. It also limits functional integration. Pollinators are supported at the margins. Soil biology is managed indirectly. Pest suppression relies on external controls rather than internal balance. The farm becomes a patchwork of compliance zones instead of a cohesive ecosystem. Another hidden cost is temporal. Biodiversity takes time to establish. Many sustainability programs measure success annually. Short-term gains are rewarded, long-term stability is assumed. This favors fast-responding species and practices. Slow-building complexity is sidelined. When diversity is forced to perform on a schedule, it becomes ornamental. The irony is that farmers understand this. Most know that real resilience requires messiness, irregularity, local adaptation, but sustainability systems often penalize deviation. So biodiversity is implemented carefully, safely, in ways that do not threaten performance metrics. The result is a system that looks more alive without behaving much differently. The cost is opportunity. The opportunity to build systems that self-regulate, absorb shocks, and reduce intervention over time. Instead, intervention remains central. Diversity decorates the system but does not govern it. The field looks richer. The dynamics remain fragile. Sustainable farming is often presented as smarter, simpler, and more intuitive. Fewer inputs, better systems, nature doing more of the work. The reality is the opposite. Most sustainability-driven systems demand more human attention, not less. More observation, more decision points, more timing sensitivity, more interpretation of signals that are rarely clear. The labor does not disappear. It becomes invisible. Farmers are expected to act as agronomists, ecologists, data analysts, and compliance officers at the same time. They monitor soil moisture, biological activity, pest pressure, carbon metrics, and paperwork, often without proportional compensation. This knowledge burden is rarely acknowledged in sustainability narratives. The system assumes competence as a baseline and treats learning costs as personal responsibility. Mistakes are framed as poor management, not system complexity. This creates quiet pressure. Sustainable systems tolerate less error. When everything is finely tuned, deviations cascade quickly. A missed timing window, a delayed application, a wrong species choice can undo months of progress. Stress increases. Cognitive load increases, burnout follows, yet none of this appears in reports. There is also a generational effect. Knowledge-heavy systems favor producers with access to education, networks, and capital. Smaller or older operations struggle to keep up. Exit rates rise. Consolidation accelerates. Sustainability improves metrics while narrowing participation. The hidden cost is human. It is the expectation that farmers absorb complexity indefinitely because the outcome feels morally justified. The field looks calm. The person managing it is carrying the weight. Public policy loves sustainability because it looks like progress that can be regulated. Targets are set, programs are launched, subsidies are attached to practices. Compliance becomes proof of responsibility. On paper, it all aligns neatly. On the ground, it tightens. When sustainability is translated into policy, it stops being guidance and becomes direction. Farmers are encouraged to adopt specific practices, not because they fit local conditions, but because they fit administrative logic. Support becomes conditional, funding follows checklists, deviation becomes risky. This shifts power subtly. Decision-making moves away from the field and toward institutions that rarely deal with biological variability. The system rewards obedience over adaptation. Policies assume uniformity. Agriculture does not offer it. As rules accumulate, flexibility erodes. Farmers learn to farm the policy as much as the land. Innovation narrows to what is allowed. Risk-taking declines. Sustainability becomes something done to farmers, not with them. The hidden cost is autonomy. And without autonomy, resilience is theoretical. The final layer of sustainable farming does not exist in the field. It exists in the mind of the consumer. Sustainability works because it offers moral relief. It allows people far removed from agriculture to participate ethically without understanding systems. Buying becomes an act of alignment. Consumption becomes conscience. The product does not just feed, it absolves. This creates a powerful narrative loop. Consumers demand clean food. Brands promise responsible sourcing. Farmers are asked to meet the expectation. The cost flows backward, quietly. Consumers rarely pay directly for complexity. They pay for reassurance. Price sensitivity remains. Expectations rise. The gap is absorbed at the production level. This is where sustainability narratives become dangerous. They frame agriculture as the moral variable in the system, while ignoring structural constraints. Weather, markets, debt, biology. If something goes wrong, it feels like failure, not friction. Farmers are positioned as custodians of virtue rather than managers of risk. The moment outcomes disappoint, trust erodes. Premiums vanish, labels change, the consumer moves on, the cost, again, stays behind. There is also a simplification effect. Sustainability messaging reduces farming to good and bad practices, right choices and wrong ones. This flattens nuance and punishes context. When agriculture is moralized, disagreement becomes suspect. Trade-offs become excuses. Reality becomes inconvenient. This discourages honest communication. Farmers learn to speak the language expected of them, not the truth they live with. The system becomes performative. The hidden cost is distance. The more sustainability is sold as a feeling, the less connected consumers become to real agricultural constraints. Expectations drift. Pressure increases. The field is no longer just producing food. It is producing meaning, and meaning is expensive. Real sustainability is not attractive. That is its biggest problem. It does not photograph well. It does not move in straight lines. It produces setbacks as often as gains. It refuses annual validation and resists universal rules. Real sustainability is contextual, slow, and uncomfortable. It would require admitting that no single practice is inherently good or bad outside of context. That reduced tillage can help or hurt. That disturbance can be destructive or restorative. That inputs can be tools, not sins. That resilience often looks inefficient in the short term. This kind of sustainability cannot be standardized easily. It cannot be rolled out through slogans. It cannot be guaranteed through certification alone. And because it cannot be packaged cleanly, it does not scale through marketing. Real sustainability would also force an honest redistribution of cost. If society wants farming systems that absorb environmental risk, then society has to absorb part of that risk financially. Stable pricing, long-term contracts, shared downside, not temporary premiums tied to fragile labels. Right now, sustainability asks farmers to internalize complexity so others can externalize responsibility. That is not sustainability. That is outsourcing risk with a moral frame. A truly sustainable system would prioritize adaptability over compliance, outcomes over practices, trajectories over snapshots. It would accept variability as normal rather than failure. It would also tolerate disagreement. Different regions would pursue different paths. Some would disturb soil strategically. Others would avoid it. Some would chase carbon depth. Others would focus on water dynamics. Success would be judged over decades, not quarters. That kind of system scares institutions. It cannot be controlled easily. It cannot be audited cheaply. It cannot be explained in one sentence. But it would actually work. The final hidden cost of sustainable farming, as it is commonly sold, is honesty. Honest systems require honest conversations about limits, trade-offs, and loss. Greenwashing avoids loss by pretending it can be eliminated. It cannot. It can only be moved. The beautiful field, the clean label, the comforting language, all of it exists to reassure us that the cost has been paid. It hasn't. It has just been delayed, displaced, or denied. Sustainability is not a destination. It is a permanent negotiation with reality. Any system that claims otherwise is not sustainable. It is fragile, and fragility, no matter how well branded, always sends the bill somewhere. Usually to the land, usually to the farmer, usually later.